Welcome, everybody. My name is Jeff Roten, and I'm with Metro Vancouver Regional Parks. So first of all, I want to welcome everybody to the Nature Connections webinar series and from the Campbell Valley Nature House. And so this webinar series is graciously hosted by Pacific Parklands Foundation. And I'd like to introduce their Executive Director, Janet Antonio, to say a few words. Welcome, Janet.
Thank you, Jeff, and welcome to everyone. It's great to see so many people and families sitting down and sharing with the kids, and this is going to be a great presentation. It's going to be a lot of fun. But first, I'd like to start by acknowledging that the Nature House is on the ancestral homelands of the Coast Salish First Nations. And on behalf of us all, I wish to extend our appreciation for the opportunity to hold this webinar on their shared traditional territory. I'd also like to take just a moment to share with you that the Pacific Parkland Foundation was founded 20 years ago to support Metro Vancouver Regional Parks. We raise funds and we give grants to protect our parks and connect people to nature. I'd also like to let you know that we do have a scholarship that is open for applications right now. So if you visit our website, you'll have a chance to check that out if you know a young person who is looking for some post-secondary education funding. And with that, I'd like to thank Jeff again and Michelle from the Wildlife Preservation Canada and to the Campbell Valley Nature House for partnering with us. It is a pleasure to be here today and to share this with you.
So today I'm very excited to welcome Michelle MacKenzie from Wildlife Preservation Canada to talk about the Oregon spotted frog. And I've seen a preview and she has a great presentation that's really informative and fun. So welcome, Michelle.
Thank you. All right, so let's get ready to go here. I'm going to share my screen. So first, I'll just do a little introduction on myself. My name's Michelle. Like Jeff said, I'm an Endangered Species Technician with Wildlife Preservation Canada, and I work on the BC Wetland Recovery Team. So the species that I work with are the Oregon spotted frog, which we're going to be talking about today, as well as the western painted turtle. And Wildlife Preservation Canada specializes in science-based techniques, such as conservation breeding, for species whom habitat protection simply is not enough to save them from extinction. And we're the only organization in Canada to provide this sort of direct, hands-on care. So for many endangered species in Canada, WPC is their last defense. All right, so let's jump right into talking about the frogs. So the Oregon spotted frogs, beautiful picture here. The scientific name for this species is Rana pretiosa, and the translation for that is actually precious frog, which is very fitting for this species as they are highly endangered. So the COSWIC status for this species is endangered, like I said, and COSWIC stands for the Committee on the Status of Endangered Wildlife in Canada. So what does endangered mean? That means that there's not very many left in the wild. But how many do you think there are left in the wild? So let's have a little quiz. Jeff is going to have a little poll pulled up here. So how many Oregon spotted frogs do you think are left in Canada? Less than 300, 500 to 600, 600 to 700, or 1,000 to 1,200? Okay, so they are considered Canada's most endangered amphibian, with only an estimated 688 adults in the wild. So for such a physically small species, this is an alarmingly small number of individuals, and they clearly need our help. Okay, so let's get into a little bit more about how do you know that you're looking at an Oregon spotted frog. So we'll talk about some ID here. So first of all, just to make things interesting, coloration between individuals is highly variable. So that does actually make it quite difficult to tell them just by looking at their color. However, some things that you can look for is the spots that they have. They're called Oregon spotted frogs. So they do have light spots with darker rings on the outside, which creates sort of a halo effect. However, this is not always evident in all individuals. In addition, they do have raised bumps on their back and their side, kind of like what you would expect to see on a toad. Their bellies are typically a mottled gray to white color. And they have special adaptations for their aquatic lifestyle, which has an effect on their appearance. And one of those is their upward facing eyes. So from above, you can see that their eyes do not protrude beyond their body line. And this means that their eyes are facing upward. And this allows them to see underwater and to be looking directly above them. And this is great for predator detection while they're completely submerged. And another excellent aquatic adaptation that this species has is their fully webbed back feet. So they are excellent swimmers. This species also has a very rounded snout, unlike some other species which have more of a pointed snout. They have these lines on their body that we call dorsal lateral folds. So the presence or absence of them or their location on the body helps us to identify amphibian species. And in Oregon spotted frogs, they are present and visible. And again, these are just some basic guidelines. So coloration and spot patterns can vary greatly between individuals, and it can be hard to distinguish the species from some other species, especially here in the Fraser Valley. So let's talk about, where do these frogs live? So you can see this nice map here, and it's kind of zoomed into our area here in the Fraser Valley. So here in the Fraser Valley, unfortunately, we only have 6 remnant populations left. And you can see by this map that their historical range was quite broad, and it does go down into the States, and they are still in the States. But the black dots here are our remnant populations, which means that those are the only places in Canada that they're found. So like I said, there are 6 of those. And unfortunately, as of 2019, only one of these populations meets the minimum number of breeding females to be considered a stable population. And that particular population has an estimated 195 females in it. But some good news is that if you look on the map here, the little spot named Chaplin is a constructed wetland that was built in 2019. And it has been, or sorry, not 2019, 2009. And it's been the recipient of captive bred Oregon spotted frogs starting in 2010. So this project has been a collaboration between Wildlife Preservation Canada, the Provincial Recovery Team, and other non-for-profit organizations. And some really exciting news for this species is that as of this year, in 2020, we actually found egg masses in Chaplin wetland, which means that there are frogs there that are surviving and thriving, and they're healthy enough to be reproducing. So that's a very, very good news story for this species. Okay, so why should we care about Oregon spotted frogs and whether they're endangered or not? Well, there's a few reasons. So first of all, ecosystems are extremely complex, and all levels are important to its proper function. So if we remove one species, it disrupts the whole balance of an ecosystem. Frogs are important for pest control as well as the maintenance of proper water quality. So if we help protect Oregon spotted frog habitat, we help protect the habitat of other species. Secondly, Oregon spotted frogs are something that we can consider an indicator species. So in general, amphibians are excellent indicator species. And an indicator species is one which is very susceptible to changes in the environment. So we can tell from their health, from their absence or presence in an ecosystem, whether that ecosystem is a healthy one. So if Oregon spotted frogs are gone from an area where they used to be prevalent, then that tells us that there's something wrong with that ecosystem and we need to look and see. And finally, Oregon spotted frogs are a part of our natural heritage. And because of the damage that we as humans have done to their habitat, they need our help to persist. And this little background picture is actually a picture from the Chaplin wetland. So it's a really beautiful spot that we are putting these lucky frogs. So let's talk a little bit now about the life cycle of the Oregon spotted frog. So Oregon spotted frogs, like other frogs, are a metamorphic species. So that means that they take different forms at different stages of their life. So you can see here the adults in this picture are in a position called amplexus. And this is a breeding behavior that many frogs display, where the male frog will hold on to the lady frog from behind until she releases her eggs, at which time he will fertilize them externally. And that's what this picture up here is. So that's an egg mass. And something that we can note here just from looking at these pictures is that there's a few things that you can do to be able to tell a male frog from a female frog. So a female frog is always going to be bigger than the male frog with Oregon spotted frogs, because she needs room in her body to store all those eggs. So that's one way to tell a male from a female. Secondly, the male frogs have enlarged and darkened thumb pads and larger forearms than the females. And these thumb pads are actually called nuptial pads. And as you can see in the left-hand picture here on your screen, the male has his arms tucked right under her armpits and is holding on tight. And those nuptial pads help him hang on even tighter. So those are only present in males. So those are the two main ways that we can tell them apart. So looking again at this picture of the egg mass, how many eggs do you think are in an Oregon spotted egg mass? So Jeff has another little poll here that he's going to pull up. So there we go. Perfect. So how many eggs do you think are in an average Oregon spotted frog egg mass? Do you think it's 50 to 200, 200 to 800, 800 to 1500, or over 2000 eggs? So, okay, well, good job, guys. The correct answer is between 200 to 800. So obviously that's a pretty big variable between 200 and 800. And what that depends on is the age and the size of the female. So the older she gets, the more mature she's going to be, and she's going to be able to produce more eggs as she's larger. So again, the correct answer was between 200 to 800 eggs per egg mass. Okay, so next in the life cycle, we have tadpoles. So tadpoles in this species usually form in between April to August. So it's kind of a long period of transition for them when they're undergoing metamorphosis. So you can see in this picture here that the tadpoles actually start to develop inside their egg jelly, which they actually utilize as their first very important food source. So they actually sort of eat their way out of their eggs. Next, we have the tadpoles. And this is a really nice close-up picture here. And then next we have what we call a metamorph. So with tadpoles, the back legs will form first and then the front. And when all four legs are formed, their body undergoes a massive internal change. So they actually switch from gill breathing to lung breathing, and from a herbivorous diet, so from eating plants, to a carnivorous diet, so to eating things like crickets and other bugs. So here's a question. Once they have all of their limbs, what do you think happens to their tail? Because frogs don't typically have tails. So this is another little poll that we have. What do you think happened to a tadpole tail? Do you think that they absorb it? Do you think that it just falls off? Or do you think that other tadpoles bite it off? All right. Oh, you guys are on a roll. That is right. So tadpoles will absorb their tails. So during this time, after they have grown all four of their limbs, they will, for about a week, not eat as they undergo this incredible internal change. And during this time, they absorb their tail in order to gain nutrients so that they can survive this dramatic transition. So that's a cool, weird, fun fact that you can wow your friends with. So here we actually have a really cool little underwater video of some of our Oregon spotted frog tadpoles. So as you can see here, they're eating. It's a kind of a slurry of boiled lettuce, which mimics their diet that they have in the wild of decomposed greenery. And as you can see, these tadpoles have their full tail, and some of them are just sprouting their back little legs. All right, so next in the life cycle is a froglet. So this is after they have absorbed their tails. And we have a little video here that's sometimes a little choppy, but hopefully it's gonna work here.
That's working fine.
Perfect, so you guys will be able to see some froglets jump up out of the water here, and they're eating crickets. There we go. So by September, all frogs have morphed and are now considered juvenile frogs. And they eat lots of creepy crawlies every day in order to grow. All right, so now that we know a little bit more about the Oregon spotted frog, where to find it, what it looks like, what its life cycle looks like, let's talk about why they're an endangered. So there's certainly some challenges that this species is facing. And obviously there's many contributing factors in order for a species to become endangered, but we'll touch on a few of the major ones here. So one of the major ones for this species is loss of suitable habitat. So they just do not have enough suitable habitat for them to be able to thrive anymore. And this, of course, is due to human interference and development of different sorts. So we'll get a little bit more into that on the next slide. And one of the other main factors for this species is the threat posed by invasive species. So an invasive species is one which is brought in to an ecosystem from somewhere else. So it's brought in where it is not naturally found, and they negatively disrupt that ecosystem. So there is a specific invasive species that I will talk about that is a really big problem for the Oregon spotted frog. So let's get into a little bit more detail on those. So like I said, habitat loss, loss of suitable habitat is a really big threat, a really big problem for Oregon spotted frogs. So the Oregon spotted frogs require a year-round supply of water. And they are shallow, warm water marsh specialists. In the spring, they will lay their eggs in the warm, shallow water of these marshes. And in the winter, they will overwinter in these bodies of water that do not freeze completely. And they'll actually bury themselves in the silt and debris at the bottom of these ponds and spend the whole winter down there. So it's very important that they have access to clean, safe water all year round. In addition, there have been extensive changes to the landscape here in the Fraser Valley over the last 100 years. So here in the lower mainland, there's been huge changes. Between the present day locations of Abbotsford and Chilliwack, there used to be a huge expanse of water called Sumas Lake. And it was surrounded by extensive wetlands, but unfortunately, in the 1920s, this lake and these wetlands were drained for agriculture and development. So obviously this drastically changed the ecological infrastructure in the area, and it forever altered the habitat of the native species. And this took away very important habitat that this species needed. So since the drainage of the lake, continuous development of the area has led to smaller and smaller populations of Oregon spotted frogs for them to be able to thrive in. And now all populations are unfortunately separated from one another. And the further issues include hydrological modifications, so draining issues and culverts, as well as a complete loss of habitat due to development in agriculture. And the Fraser Valley is an extremely rich agricultural land, and so much of the Oregon spotted frogs' suitable habitat has been now converted to farmland. So all of these things together, the need for clean water, taking away so much of that water, and then the added infrastructure and development and agricultural development has really had a very detrimental effect on this species. So let's talk now about invasive species as a challenge for the Oregon spotted frogs. So pictured here, we have different life stages of an American bullfrog. So like I said before, just as a reminder, an invasive species is one that's brought in from somewhere else and negatively disrupts another ecosystem. So the American bullfrog is naturally found in Eastern North America, so in Ontario and Quebec, and Eastern and Central United States. And interestingly enough, the American bullfrog was actually brought here for culinary reasons because people wanted to eat frog legs, but then they discovered that the American bullfrog does not actually taste very good. And so unfortunately, they released these frogs into our wetlands. And that created a huge problem because bullfrogs will eat absolutely everything, and they grow and spread very, very quickly. They have adapted very well to the beautiful weather and the beautiful habitat that we have here in the Fraser Valley. So as you can see, we have egg masses taking over areas where our Oregon spotted frog egg masses should be. And we have these giant tadpoles that our tadpoles and our frogs just simply cannot compete with. So unfortunately, the added pressure of introduced species, such as this American bullfrog, is just too much to handle for our native frogs, such as the Oregon spotted frogs. And that has caused a huge disruption and is part of the reason why this species, unfortunately, is endangered. So let's talk about some good news now. Let's talk about what is Wildlife Preservation Canada doing to help the Oregon spotted frogs. And the answer to that is conservation breeding. So what is conservation breeding? So it can be described as when a mommy frog and a daddy frog love each other very much, and they have a very safe, clean environment, and they have a lot of food being fed to them every day. When all of these factors add up, then they're able to make lots of strong baby frogs. And that's what we want in conservation breeding. So we purposely keep frogs together in order so that they can make more frogs, so that we can release those frogs into the wild to increase the population that's struggling in the wild. So obviously the species is struggling by itself. And so what we're doing is we're supplementing those wild populations with strong, healthy individuals. So here's a little video of our setup. So these are some of our adult Oregon spotted frogs that we keep with us year round. Right now, our captive breeding adult population contains 52 males and 43 females. So as you can see, their setup includes these large bins in which they have, it's about 300 gallons of water in these bins. So there's lots of room for them to swim around. And additionally, they have these floating islands that they can come up on to bask in the sunshine, as well as for being able to come up and eat their crickets. So I have a true or false question for you, and I sort of already answered the question myself earlier in the presentation, so this will see if you guys were paying attention. But true or false, our breeding population of adults will stay underwater and not eat all winter long. Do you think that's true or false? Okay, good. Most of you were paying attention. So the incredible thing about these frogs is that they're adapted to the weather in this region, which means that it's cold in the winter here. And so they have adapted so that their bodies will slow down, their metabolism will slow all the way down, and they bury themselves at the bottom of these ponds, or in our captive breeding situation, at the bottom of their tubs. And they enter a sort of hibernation where they're able to stay underwater all winter, and they don't come up to eat or breathe for months at a time. So that's a really incredible thing that this species has done in order to adapt to adversity in this area. All right, so here is a little video again of our setup. So this shows underwater some of our younger individuals. So these are some juvenile frogs here. And you might spot something different about this guy right here. This year we had a few melanistic individuals develop. So melanistic is very much like albino, except it's not a complete lack of pigment. These frogs still have eye colors, so they're called melanistic, but it's just really interesting to see. And as you can see, there's also some tadpoles in this tub still developing, and this other beautiful froglet. So these guys spend a lot of their time swimming around underwater, but they do have the floating islands that they can come up and bask in the sunshine and to eat their crickets every day. All right, so time for some more good news. At our facility, we were able to raise 2,400 Oregon spotted frogs in 2020. So out of these, about 1,800 of them were from our captive breeding efforts, and about 340 of these individuals came from egg masses that we collected in the wild. So some of those egg masses in Chaplin that we were so excited about, that I told you about earlier in the presentation, that really shows us that the population is starting to make a little bit of a comeback, and they're healthy and thriving in that area. We brought some of those in for extra safekeeping, and then we released those as froglets. And the remainder of the froglets that we raised this year were from our partners at the Vancouver Aquarium. So once we've raised all these frogs, we get to have the incredible opportunity to release them into the wild. So this is always done in September, when we've given them lots of time to grow and eat. And all of our frogs that we release into the wild get marked in some way, depending on their size, so that when we come back in subsequent years to that wetland, we know that they're from our captive breeding population. So one of the ways that we mark our frogs is with something called a pit tag. So I'm just moving my box here out of the way. So this here circled right in the picture of this x-ray of a frog is called a pit tag. And it's a little sort of microchip that's the size of a rice grain that we put under the skin of these frogs. And it's kind of like the microchip that your dogs or cats might have. So when they get lost and someone takes them to the vet's office and scans them, they know who they are. So PIT stands for Passive Integrated Transponder. And it's, like I said, it helps us know exactly which individual we come across in the wild. Another sort of tagging that we do is called VIE. And that stands for Visible Implant Elastomers, and it's a colorful gel that's like a tattoo that goes on the frog's foot that allows us to see which year they came from. So we give all of our 2020 frogs this year, we gave them a little green tattoo, for instance, and last year I believe we used orange. So if we go into the wild and we come across one of these frogs and they have an orange foot, we know that that's an individual that we released in 2019. So those are just some of the ways that after we release them, we're able to keep track of them in the wild. So let's talk about what you can do to help this species. There's a few things that you guys can do. So first of all, it's important to keep the wild spaces that we have still left wild. So when you guys go out and enjoy the outdoors, it's important to take out whatever you take in. So always pick up your garbage and leave it the way that you found it. You can keep it clean. So do your part to keep the environment clean by putting garbage and waste where it belongs. And keep it where you found it. Never move animals you find in the wild. Moving animals can spread disease and can create an invasive species problem, like we talked about earlier with the American bullfrog. And you can support Wildlife Preservation Canada. So I encourage you guys to go onto our webpage and check out what else we're doing to help support other wetland species in BC, like the Western Painted Turtle. And always take time to observe and appreciate nature around you. All right, and that's the end of my presentation. So now is a time for you guys to send your questions into Jeff, and hopefully I'll be able to answer all of them.
Just a quick side note. The one about the tadpole losing its tail, I knew the answer. I had it in front of me, and I still answered wrong. I thought it falls off. How many different species of frogs are there?
Oh, throughout the world, there's hundreds of different species of frogs. So this is a specific species of frog that we're talking about, the Oregon spotted frog. Yeah.
Okay. And what causes the frog to develop as melanistic?
So there's a lot of different genetic triggers that need to be in place in order for a frog or any animal to sort of develop normally. So I'm not exactly aware of what the exact genetic intricacies of that are, but it does have to do with genetics. And so there was just a certain amount that developed that way this year, and it certainly doesn't happen every year. But yeah, that's, I guess, the best answer I can give to that.
Okay, thanks. Does it hurt the frog when you insert the pit tag?
No, I don't think so. We make a very small incision into their skin. And the interesting thing about frogs is that the skin is not actually attached to the body. So there's actually sort of a cavity and a space in between. So it's not vascular. So there's never any blood. So we make a tiny incision and put this small little tag in, and then it very, very quickly heals itself.
We have another question here, and I'm assuming it's about the Oregon spotted frog. Are the frogs poisonous?
That's a good, interesting question. So these frogs aren't. There certainly are some throughout the world that either can be poisonous as a survival mechanism to keep predators away, but this particular species is not. Okay.
Alicia, you posted in the, and Alicia's with Fraser Valley Conservancy and a colleague of Michelle's, and I noticed there were a lot of photos by you in the presentation, Alicia, so thanks. So you posted a URL, maybe in the chat box, you can type that in there as well and indicate what that is. That would be helpful. Not sure. Oh, Frog ID guide. Okay, thanks, Alicia. That's great. And someone's asking, what can we do about the American bullfrog?
Yeah, so that's a really tricky problem. The main thing that we tell people right now is to not go out and be a vigilante. So we don't want people going out and walloping these frogs. There are projects underway that can be supported. So the Fraser Valley Conservancy is working on a bullfrog project right now. But the main thing is to just not make the problem worse. So to just be very aware of how they spread, and to not be a part of the issue. So as far as not releasing other species that could become an issue into the wild. And that's the best advice that I can give right now.
Okay, we got a lot of questions coming in here, so I left a lot of time here. So have any spotted frogs been introduced to the have any spotted frogs been introduced to the marsh south of Pitt Lake?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
I wonder if that individual has seen an Oregon spotted frog there, or thought that they have, or they just think it's a really suitable habitat.
Let's see. Okay. And maybe you can type that in, Melody, if you have any other comments about that. Here's another question here. Why do bullfrogs eat other frogs?
Bullfrogs are carnivorous, and like I said, they'll eat absolutely everything. So they're going to take the opportunity to eat whatever is in front of them. And unfortunately here, sometimes that means that's our frogs. So they're not picky as to what they're going to eat. They're not going to say, oh, that's another frog, I'm not going to eat it. They're just going to see it as a snack and take the opportunity.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let's see. So I'm going to answer a question here. Whoop, I'm just trying to keep track of here. And I know Annabelle, whose name there says Rosabelle, can you bring the frog home as a pet? Not a good idea. Leave them in the wild where they belong, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, yeah. Um, oh, here's cute. What do you think the frogs dream about all winter?
That is a good question. I would say they're probably dreaming about crickets.
Great, thanks. Okay. Yeah, okay, we've already answered that one. How do these frogs defend themselves?
Well, that's a really good question. So this species is what we call a cryptic species. So that means that they're very, very good at camouflage. So if you go into a wetland and you even know that there's Oregon spotted frogs there, you'll be very hard pressed to actually be able to find them because they are masters of disguise and masters of hiding. So that's one way. They also defend themselves by being very good and fast swimmers. So they're much more comfortable in the water and are able to get away from predators very quickly in the water.
Okay, I don't know if you can answer this question, but Allison Simonetti wants to know, why are frogs shaped like the way they are?
Well, that is a good question.
Yeah.
I would say that they're shaped the way they are with their legs because they need to be able to swim as well as they do. So they have those really big back legs for swimming and jumping, and the nice little aerodynamic bodies to move through the water.
Okay.
Yeah. It's Janet. I think the question was, why are frogs' eyes shaped that way?
Oh, eyes. Okay, sorry, I misread it. Thanks, Janet.
Oh, okay. So I talked a little bit about how the Oregon spotted frog, their eyes are facing upward. So I don't know if maybe that's what the question is related to, but the frogs, some frogs have eyes on the side of their head, and those will be a terrestrial species, whereas these frogs are an aquatic species. So they have their eyes on top of their head so that they can be underwater where they feel most safe, but still be able to see above them outside of the water. Where predators may be. So that's why they have the frog or their eyes on top of their head.
Okay, and there was a question put forward. I think you've already answered that, but I'll ask again. It's in the chat box to the panelists. How large is the chaplain population? I think you did indicate that from in the outset, but maybe you can repeat that.
Sure. So we don't have an exact number on the chaplain population. Maybe that's something that Alicia can actually help answer. She can type that into the chat. She's the numbers expert. What we can do is we can go back and trap in subsequent years. And by seeing the egg masses there, that shows us that they are there. But as far as exact numbers, we're not exactly sure of an adult population.
I'm going to allow Alicia to talk. So there we
nice.
go. So there. So Alicia, you should be able to, you would have to unmute yourself. And then you can talk, Alicia, if you want to help out with some of these answers, because we got a lot of questions coming in. Here we go, Alicia.
Oh, hi. Am I on? I
You
didn't
are.
expect
We
to
don't
talk.
see you, but you're talking.
Hi.
We can hear you.
Hi. Yeah, I'm happy to help. I put in the chat as well. We've had over 10,000 Oregon spotted frogs released there in various forms, from tadpoles to little froglets, over the last 10 years. And the really exciting thing for Wildlife Preservation Canada and the rest of the recovery team is the discovery of those 3 egg masses this year. That means we had at least 3 adult females make it to adulthood and lay those eggs, and at least 1 very lucky male, potentially 3 males. But it sounds like a lot, but in terms of creating a new population, we've made it over the hump, and that's very exciting. Thanks for having me on.
Okay, we do have a question here from Annabelle. You did indicate, but maybe you can repeat, you talked about how they eat crickets, but she wants to know what they eat and what's their favorite food. I think probably crickets, but what else do they eat?
So we supply our frogs with crickets, but they do have available to them whatever other creepy crawlies they can find in their tubs. So when they're out in the wetland, they're going to be eating all sorts of little insects and little critters that they can find in the water. So as adult frogs, they are carnivores. So that means that they're going to eat things like insects and sources of meat for them.
Okay, and next question, how big are bullfrogs compared to the spotted frogs?
It's a good question. So our adult Oregon spotted frogs, some of them are about the size of my fist, but they can be smaller. So they're not the biggest frogs. And a full-grown American bullfrog, alarmingly, can be like the size of a dinner plate. So they can be this big. So our Oregon spotted frogs, unfortunately, are often quite an easy snack for a full-grown bullfrog.
Okay, and what other predators do Oregon spotted frogs have other than
So they're
bullfrogs?
going to have other predators like birds, so like herons. They have other aquatic predators, such as largemouth bass. So they're kind of being bombarded from all angles, from the air and the water.
Okay, and Jocelyn was asking, and Annabelle answered, it's like, is it safe to hold frogs? And Annabelle said, probably not, they don't belong in your hand.
Yeah, so frogs actually have very porous skin, very absorbent. So they take on a lot of moisture. So if you have anything on your hands, like a detergent or a lotion, or maybe a hand sanitizer, and then you hold a frog, that can actually really, really hurt them. So you need to be very careful. And we recommend that you don't handle frogs. So if you see them, just observe and appreciate.
Okay, and Nancy wants to know if their eyes are on top of their head, how do they see where they're going?
That's a good question. Their eyes are on top of their head, but they are able to look in front of them. So as they move forward, they can look in front of them.
Now we have a couple of questions about what colors are the frogs, but I guess that should be apparent from the photos, but I don't know if you want to talk about that at all.
Sure, yeah. The color of the frogs varies, like I said earlier in the presentation, but in general, they tend to be beigeish brown to slightly orange color. And then they have those spots on them, the Oregon spotted frog. So they have those light spots with the dark outer rim. And that's probably the best way to tell what kind of species you're looking at.
Okay, and Melody wants to know, at what age do they become sexually mature?
That's a good question. I believe that in the wild, it's about 3 or 4. So I say in the wild because sometimes we retain some of the froglets and we overwinter them inside, and they don't hibernate, so they have that extra time to grow. And then those individuals will become sexually mature faster because they're larger, so closer to about 2 years. But I believe if left in their natural cycle of activity and hibernation, it's about 3 to 4 years.
Okay, and how many days until they get arms and legs, I guess? Yeah.
Oh, that's a good question. So it usually takes several weeks. It's between sort of April to August. I can't think of exactly how many days, but it is a span of several weeks. They grow into really, really big tadpoles. And then because they don't eat during the time when they're absorbing their tail, the tadpoles actually tend to be bigger than the froglets that they turn into. So they almost shrink into little froglets.
And Alicia, if you want to add anything to that, you can just always unmute yourself. I've got you added here, so you can speak anytime if you want to help Michelle out. They're really grilling her today. This is the most questions we've had from people for any of our webinars. They're really giving you a tough time here. Melody wants to know what sound they make.
Oh, that's a really good question. So in the last slide, you could hear it's a little bit of almost a grumbling sound. So that's kind of just their call. But during the breeding season, we will hear the males inside the tubs. And it sounds a little bit like there's someone far off in the distance knocking on a door. So it's not your typical ribbit that you hear from a frog. It's more of a knock, 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 knock.
Okay, and Helen wants to know, can frogs give you warts?
That's a good question. No, they can't, and neither can toads. That's an old wives' tale.
Okay, thanks. I can see Annabelle, or her name says Rosabelle here, is asking lots of questions. So I'm going to just skip to a couple of them. Rosabelle, does a frog carry disease?
Yes, I would imagine they do. So that's a part of why invasive species can be an issue is they have frog diseases. So something that like we wouldn't necessarily be troubled by. But if you bring a frog species into an ecosystem that isn't usually there, it can have a disease that maybe they're used to having and have good defenses for. And you bring it into a different ecosystem, and those native frogs might not have any defenses.
And Annabelle has another good question here. She said, what do frogs do that help us?
That's a good question. So frogs are very good pest controls. So they're really good at keeping populations of bugs like mosquitoes in check. And they're really good for helping to keep the water quality good in our wetlands. So like I said, it's all part of that really complex ecosystem that all of these different small parts are working together.
Okay, do we have any other questions coming in here? I know we're getting close to noon and people will probably have to leave us then. So maybe as I'm waiting for people to type in more questions, I'm just going to, and actually at that time, maybe at this time, Janet, maybe you can add that last slide that indicates the different websites for Pacific Parklands Foundation and Metro Vancouver. There we go. So again, if you want more information about Pacific Parklands Foundation, Metro Vancouver, or Wildlife Preservation Canada, there are the websites there. I encourage you to check them out. And I don't see any more questions. Are there any more coming in here? Let's see. Well, there we go. So Alicia is asking, prompting, how else can you help Wildlife Preservation Canada? So maybe you can talk about a little bit about that, Michelle. I think you.
Yeah, sure. So I encourage you guys to visit our website and learn about our other programs and ways that you can potentially donate your time or perhaps some funds. Like I said, we do work with other endangered species across Canada. So I think one of the most important things that you guys can do is to educate yourself about these animals that are in need of our help.
I just want to thank, first of all, Michelle, for an awesome presentation. This is really informative and interesting. And also thank Pacific Parklands Foundation for hosting this webinar and the whole webinar series. Oh yeah, so Harj's question was, how long do frogs live for? Good question.
Yeah, so
thank you.
Our frogs, Oregon spotted frogs, when kept in captivity, can live for around 12 years. Unfortunately, in the wild, most frogs don't live that long because they're sort of at the bottom of the food chain. But if we're very well taken care of, they can live past 10 years, certainly.
Okay, so just to let you know that, again, thanks so much. This was great, and thanks for answering all those questions. They really put you to the test there today. And I encourage you to follow Pacific Parklands Foundation, their Facebook page, and they'll be posting those webinars as events around 6 days before each webinar. So again, thanks everybody for joining us today. Stay dry and enjoy the rest of your day. And thanks again to Michelle for an awesome, awesome presentation. So good afternoon, everyone, and take care.